I think what you see with him in private is what you get from him in public, and that's a slightly confounding thing. I mean, for instance, I asked him, are you so committed to finding common ground with politicians that you see have a pint with Kemi or Nigel? And he just said, yeah, they're both able politicians. Well, he was a bit more expansive than that. And that was really disarming. If you're for a political journalist, someone just calling it as they see it, or just giving you a straightforward answer to a question, is really disarming.
Andy Burnham moves into number 10 today with a 10-year plan for the country and feeling fairly relaxed about his new job. It's a job that has put paid to many of his predecessors. He is the 7th Prime Minister in the last 10 years, give or take a week or so. But he's in confident mood, and we know that because he's been speaking to Patrick Maguire, the chief political commentator of The Times. Patrick, morning to you.
Good morning, Stig.
You chatted to him in his kitchen, washing out his tea mugs like a normal bloke. And I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, Patrick, when I read every single word you wrote today, is how much of this is a shtick? I'm just a normal bloke, me, and how much is real, and how much does it matter?
I think it is. I don't think it is a shtick. I think I think Westminster is at risk of misunderstanding Andy Burnham quite profoundly, and I think Stig, he would think the question itself is a measure of how deeply cynical and how distrustful of mainstream politics we've become, that you can't even believe that Andy Burnham would make someone a cup of tea without a hidden agenda. Look, of course, he's a politician. He's a professional politician. He's a very able politician presentationally. But yeah, I don't think, I think the Andy Burnham being from the Northwest, presenting as a normal bloke, I think it's not a self-conscious or cynical thing. I think, having spent quite a lot of time with him now, I think what you see with him in private is what you get from him in public, and that's a slightly confounding thing. I mean, for instance, I asked him, are you so committed to finding common ground with politicians that you see have a pint with Kemi or Nigel? And he just said, yeah, they're both able politicians. Well, he was a bit more expansive than that. And that was really disarming. If you're for a political journalist, someone just calling it as they see it, or just giving you a straightforward answer to a question, is really disarming. And he said to me, I'm not in a position where I've been doing this too long to just give people lies to take, and that's part of the reason people don't like politics. And isn't that? And I just thought, well, that's right, isn't it? How many interviews have we all listened to on this very station and a million others, where some cabinet minister just grinds through the lines to take, written by Labour HQ or CCHQ?
Yeah, I get that. I totally hear what you're saying, and yet, are we not going to see precisely that emerging in the weeks to come? I just wonder whether it's so easy to say all this stuff. And the reason we're cynical, Patrick, I'm very cynical, I totally hold my hands up to that, is we've got good reason to be cynical because of the behaviours over the last 2 decades and more. And are we not going to still see these people being wheeled out to say, let me be clear, and then tell us some sort of obfuscating nonsense straight out of the mouths of the political class when Burnham is Prime Minister?
Yeah, well, that's the test, isn't it? That is the real test. Can he... Does this all disintegrate today? And that was the reason I, included a verse of Houseman in there, Stig, from a Shropshire lad, the land of lost content. I see it shining plain, the happy highways where I went and cannot come again. Because there is this version of Andy Burnham, and there is the Andy Burnham who will go to bed tonight having signed the letters of last resort, having assumed responsibility for a load of knotty stuff, having, had his first day-long dance with the bond market as Prime Minister. And to that, he's aware there's a risk that all disintegrates and that Andy Burnham becomes, once again, the sort of politician who'd come on this station and say, let me be clear, and then play for time for about 7 minutes or 8 minutes in his first answer. And he said, judge me on it, judge me in 6 months, judge me in 12 months. You know, you'll be able to see then whether I've been able to retain the sort of anti-politics vibe, or well, I remain myself, is what he would say.
Well, one question is the income tax thresholds policy, because he mentioned that to you. He wants to relax them to stop the stealthy tax increase, but every prime minister wants to do that. They all say they're going to do it, and then they don't, because the Treasury won't let them, because they can't find the money. That'll be a big test, won't it? Because if he wants to do it, he should be able to do it, and yet that's been a problem for both of his predecessors.
Well, he was talking about priorities, Stig, and that's the striking thing. And of course, there's lots of questions about money, right? That's the defining question of any government in the current fiscal situation. But he said, the first step of his 10-year plan to rewire the British economy, take back putting control of a load of stuff, among other things, is giving people fairly immediate help with the cost of living, right? Hitting the ground running. But a lot of it is pricey. But what he said to me is, you are going to see me quite rapidly reprioritise a range of things in order to give people breathing space on the cost of living. So you've already seen that with digital ID, and it makes you wonder. And inevitably, he did tell me the black box remains shut when I asked him who his chancellor was, and for a bit more specificity. But we'll soon find out what he is willing to deprioritise to pay what will doubtless be quite a chunky bill for immediate help on the cost of living.
Well, let's talk about the cabinet then, because it's so interesting. I mean, it hasn't leaked very much, but what's so interesting about this is that if you move Ed Miliband, you've got to move him somewhere, because you can't keep him in energy, you would imagine. If he's foreign secretary, we're going to hear from Katie Balls later on that Trump probably wouldn't like that very much. Trump is already making noises which Andy Burnham will have to be conscious of. So where does Miliband go? Where does Wes Streeting go? What happens to Yvette Cooper? What happens to Pat McFadden at welfare? Will that whole project be scrapped and someone else brought in? The personal drama is interesting, but each personal dramatic moment will tell a tale about policy as well, won't it?
Yeah, it will. Although I wonder whether it will tell us less than it ordinarily would, because the striking thing about this preparation for government process is that the circle has been very tight. It's been Andy Burnham, James Pennell, and Louise Hay. And most people have zeroed in on the idea that Andy Burnham wants a motherhood and apple pie relationship with the Parliamentary Labour Party, that, it's all very old Labour and embracing the party's traditions. But there was a really telling line in his first speech in Manchester after getting elected as a Labour MP, and he said, the political direction I set will not be up for negotiation. So you've got to wonder whether, and that's the sort of thing officials have said about access talks, actually they're being driven by him in a way they weren't ever really driven by Keir Starmer or anything. So the big question is, actually, are we going to see a Prime Minister who, with a few exceptions, they're never interested in everything, is actually the primary author of this, and cabinet ministers are empowered, but we get a clear sense from Andy Burnham of what he wants.
That's so interesting, Patrick. You're going to be fascinating reporting on this in the weeks and months to come. Great to speak to you.
Thanks, Stig.
That's Patrick Maguire, the chief political commentator of the Times. What he's implying